On the surface, the Millers seemed like the kind of family that made neighbors envious. Weekend barbecues filled with laughter, and framed portraits that painted the illusion of a perfect life. But behind that illusion was the slow rot of secrets. Caroline Miller, 43, was a mother adored by her community, known for her charity work and her soft voice that carried warmth even in gossip-filled rooms. Her husband Richard, a local contractor, spent long hours managing his business, often returning home too tired to notice the changes in his wife's eyes. And their daughter, Emily, 17, was the kind of girl who smiled through pain, bright, ambitious, and deeply in love with a boy named Ryan Turner. Ryan wasn't the kind of boy most parents approved of. He was 21, with tattoos climbing his arms and a motorcycle that rattled the silence of their quiet town. But he had a charm, the kind that drew both mother and daughter in ways neither could admit. Caroline's first real conversation with Ryan happened one rainy afternoon when he came to drop Emily home. Richard was away on a business trip, and Emily had run inside to grab her forgotten jacket, leaving her mother and boyfriend awkwardly standing under the porch roof. They talked first about weather, then music, then about loneliness. Something unspoken sparked between them, a forbidden connection that should have ended there. But Caroline's world had become unbearably quiet, her marriage cold, and Ryan's attention reckless, flattering, dangerous, gave her heart a pulse she thought she'd lost years ago. What began as harmless glances soon became late-night messages, secret meetings, and the kind of guilt that clings like perfume after a sin. Emily didn't suspect anything. She was too busy dreaming of a future with Ryan. Unaware, her mother had already begun crossing lines that could never be uncrossed. Every lie Carolyn told twisted deeper into her chest, each one whispered in the dark, each one a thread pulling her toward an inevitable tragedy. She told herself it was love. Ryan told himself it was just lust. But what neither of them knew was that this affair, born in secrecy, would end in blood, and when the truth surfaced, it wouldn't just destroy a family. It would shock an entire town. The affair began with small, stolen moments, the kind that felt innocent enough to justify. A hand brushed against another in passing, an exchange of glances that lingered too long. A text sent late at night under the guise of checking in. Carolyn told herself it was nothing. She told herself it would end soon. But forbidden things have a way of growing in the dark, and soon those messages became confessions. Those glances turned to touches, and the porch where they first met became their silent witness. Ryan was reckless, dangerous even, but he had a way of making Caroline feel seen, alive, wanted something her husband hadn't done in years. He told her she was beautiful, that age didn't matter, that he'd never met someone who understood him like she did. It was a lie, of course, or maybe a half-truth. Ryan didn't really know what he wanted. With Emily, he had youth and excitement. With Caroline, he had power and control. He played both roles, the charming boyfriend and the secret lover, until the lines blurred so much he couldn't tell who he was anymore. Caroline's guilt ate at her, but she couldn't stop. Every time she looked at her daughter, a part of her wanted to confess, to end it, to be the mother Emily deserved. But another part, darker and desperate, whispered that she needed Ryan more than her own peace. One night, when the storm outside roared louder than her conscience, Caroline called Ryan over while Richard was away. They sat by the fire, their shadows merging against the wall. And when Ryan kissed her, it wasn't passion, it was possession. For a while, the world outside didn't exist. But the next morning, as she stood by the kitchen sink watching the sun rise, Caroline felt something shift. Emily came downstairs, humming softly, wearing Ryan's hoodie. "He let me borrow it," she said with a shy smile, completely unaware that her mother had been wrapped in the same scent hours before. Caroline's stomach twisted. The reality of what she'd done pressed down like a weight she couldn't lift. She wanted to end it, to erase it all. But Ryan, emboldened by his secret control over both women, refused to let go. His visits became more frequent, his texts more demanding, and the thrill that once made Caroline feel alive began to suffocate her. It was only a matter of time before someone saw them, before the delicate web of lies they'd spun began to unravel. And when it did, the first thread to snap would be soaked in rain and blood. Caroline tried to convince herself that it was over. After that stormy night, she told Ryan never to come back, never to text, never to look at her again. But guilt and temptation are cruel ghosts. They never truly leave. Each time her phone buzzed, her heart leaped with fear and desire tangled together. Ryan wouldn't stop. He thrived on danger, on the thrill of being wanted by both mother and daughter. He started showing up, unannounced, smirking, as if daring her to resist him. Caroline would push him away one moment and find herself pulled back the next, trapped between shame and obsession. Meanwhile, Emily was happier than ever, completely oblivious to the storm brewing inside her own home. She told her mother how much she loved Ryan, how she dreamed of moving in with him after graduation, how he made her feel safe. Each word was a knife twisting deeper into Caroline's chest. One evening, Emily planned a small dinner at home to celebrate her college acceptance letter. She invited Ryan, and Caroline had no choice but to smile and agree. When he arrived, wearing that same smirk that made her knees weak and her stomach sick, Caroline felt the walls closing in. At dinner, everything looked perfect, candles flickering, soft music playing, laughter echoing through the house. But beneath the table, Ryan's foot brushed against Caroline's leg. Her breath hitched, the sound of her daughter's laughter suddenly unbearable. The tension was suffocating, and Caroline escaped to the kitchen under the pretense of fetching dessert. Ryan followed a few minutes later, cornering her near the fridge, his hand brushing against hers as he whispered, "You can't just walk away from me." Her eyes darted toward the doorway, terrified Emily might walk in. "Ryan, please," she whispered. "This has to stop." But Ryan only smiled, a dangerous, mocking smile, and said, "It stops when I say it does." That was the first moment Caroline realized the darkness she'd invited into her life wasn't just guilt, it was danger. Emily entered moments later, cheerful and unsuspecting, and the air between the three of them grew heavy with the weight of unspoken sin. Later that night, Caroline sat awake in bed, the echo of Ryan's words replaying in her mind. She tried to pray, but her thoughts kept circling back to him, his arrogance, his control, the way he could destroy everything with one careless sentence. And deep down, she knew it was only a matter of time before he did. The whispers in the shadows were getting louder now, a secret ready to explode. The night that followed the dinner was one Caroline would never forget. She lay awake, listening to the rain tapping against the windows, every drop echoing her guilt. Her mind replayed Ryan's touch, his threat, his smirk, and Emily's innocent laughter still ringing in her ears. She knew she had to end it once and for all. The next morning, Carolyn drove to Ryan's small apartment on the edge of town, her hands trembling on the wheel. She rehearsed her words, firm, final, absolute. When he opened the door, shirtless and careless, she almost lost her resolve. "It's over," she said, her voice breaking. "You stay away from me." From Emily. Ryan leaned against the doorframe, amused. "You think you can just erase me, Caroline," he said with a grin. "You're not my secret anymore. Maybe you're just hers." His words were poison. Caroline felt her world tilt. She left before he could say more, but the damage had been done. That night, Emily came home early from school, her face pale. "Mom," she asked quietly, "why did you go to Ryan's apartment today?" Caroline froze. Emily had seen her car. She tried to lie, saying she'd gone to drop off Emily's notebook, but the crack in her voice betrayed her. Emily didn't press, not yet. The house turned cold in the days that followed, each conversation more distant, each glance sharper. Caroline tried to hold her family together, but the tension seeped through everything: the dinner table, the silence, the sleepless nights. Meanwhile, Ryan began calling again, leaving messages filled with anger and jealousy. "You can't keep both of us," one said, "so choose." Caroline deleted each one, terrified her husband or daughter might hear. When Richard finally noticed her nervous behavior, he assumed it was stress, the price of pretending everything was fine. But Caroline knew better. She was standing on a cliff's edge. If she confessed, she'd lose her daughter forever. If she stayed silent, Ryan might destroy them both. She considered going to the police, but what could she say? That she had an affair with her daughter's boyfriend, and now he was threatening her. No one would understand. The guilt consumed her until it turned into paranoia. She started hearing Ryan's motorcycle late at night, seeing his shadow in reflections, feeling his presence in every creak of the floorboards. The truth was no longer a secret. It was a curse. Prose. Caroline could have confessed and sought help, ending the manipulation before tragedy struck. Coming clean might have saved her sanity and possibly Emily's trust. Cons. But her confession would have destroyed her marriage, her reputation, and her relationship with her daughter, the very things she was trying to protect. Her silence, though poisonous, felt safer than the storm that truth would unleash. Emily's world began to crumble the moment she found the messages. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when she borrowed her mother's tablet to submit a school project. Caroline was out shopping, and the device was unlocked, innocent, harmless. But curiosity, like sin, needs only a crack to enter. Emily opened a notification, then another, until she was staring at a series of messages that tore her reality apart. Words of passion, promises, and jealousy between her mother and Ryan. Her hands went cold. Her breath vanished. For a long time, she couldn't move. She just sat there, trembling, reading the proof of betrayal over and over. When Caroline came home later, humming softly, as if everything was normal, Emily looked at her differently, not as a mother, but as a stranger who had stolen something sacred. That evening, Emily didn't speak. She waited until night, then texted Ryan, "I know everything." His reply came fast. "It's not what you think. But lies have a smell." and Emily could sense every one of them. She demanded to meet, to hear the truth from his mouth. Ryan hesitated but agreed, sensing his control slipping away. Caroline noticed the tension too. Emily's silence, her forced smiles, her sudden coldness were signs of something breaking. Later that night, Caroline saw her daughter leaving the house quietly, and panic gripped her chest. She followed her barefoot into the foggy street until she saw Emily standing under a streetlight with Ryan. They were arguing, voices sharp in the still night. Caroline stayed hidden behind a parked car, heart pounding. "How could you?" Emily's voice cracked. With her. Ryan tried to calm her, saying it didn't mean anything, that it was over, but Emily pushed him away, her tears glinting in the light. Caroline wanted to step in, to explain, to beg for forgiveness, but shame nailed her to the ground. Then Emily shouted something that made Ryan's face darken. "You used both of us." He grabbed her wrist, not hard enough to hurt, but enough to make her flinch. "Don't twist this," he snapped, his temper flaring. Caroline finally ran toward them, screaming his name. Ryan let go immediately, startled, as both women stood under the streetlight, mother and daughter, trembling, broken, facing the man who had ruined them both. Emily looked at her mother, eyes filled with disbelief. "How could you?" she whispered, her voice so soft it hurt more than a scream. Caroline tried to speak, to explain, but nothing came out, just tears. Emily turned and ran, her footsteps fading into the night. Ryan stood frozen, guilt flickering across his face, but only for a second before arrogance replaced it. "You should have told her," he said coldly, before walking away. Caroline fell to her knees in the street, rain beginning to fall again, washing away her makeup and everything she once was. The secret was no longer hidden, it was alive, exposed, and bleeding. After that night, silence became the only language spoken inside the Miller house. Emily stopped talking to her mother entirely, refusing even to look at her. Caroline tried to reach out, to apologize, to explain that she'd made a terrible mistake, but every word sounded hollow in the space between them. Richard noticed the change to the sudden tension, the slammed doors, the tears behind closed rooms, but whenever he asked, both women said it was nothing. The house that once smelled of Sunday breakfasts now reeked of guilt and resentment. Emily began spending more time away, often driving aimlessly just to escape the walls closing in. One evening, she went to Ryan's place, not to reconcile, but to confront him one last time. She wanted answers, justice. Something that would help her understand how the people she loved most could destroy her so easily. When Ryan opened the door, he looked surprised, almost nervous. Emily stepped inside, her voice trembling but steady. "You ruined my life," she said. Ryan tried to charm his way out, his words slick and rehearsed, but Emily wasn't the same naive girl anymore. She saw through him. Through the arrogance, through the lies. "You played us both," she spat. "You made me hate her, but it was you all along." Something in Ryan's eyes darkened then, something dangerous and unpredictable. "You think you can just walk in here and blame me?" he said, his tone sharp. "You both wanted it. You and your mother aren't that different." The slap came before she even realized her hand had moved. The sound echoed in the small apartment. Ryan's jaw tightened. For a second, Emily thought he might hit her back, but instead, he laughed, low, cruel, chilling. "You'll regret that," he said quietly. Emily ran out before he could say more, tears blurring her vision. That night, she didn't go home. She drove to a friend's house and stayed there, ignoring every call from her mother. When Caroline discovered Emily hadn't returned, panic consumed her. She called her daughter's phone again and again, each ring feeding her dread. Then, around midnight, her phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. It was from Ryan. "You need to come here. We need to talk, alone." Caroline hesitated, fear twisting in her stomach. She should have ignored it, should have called the police, but guilt and desperation pushed her out the door. Rain began to fall again as she drove through the dark streets, headlights slicing through the fog. When she reached Ryan's apartment, the door was slightly open, the lights dim. She stepped inside, calling his name softly. The air felt heavy, thick with something she couldn't name, and somewhere in that silence, tragedy waited. The apartment was silent, except for the faint dripping of a leaky faucet somewhere inside. Caroline stepped carefully through the doorway, her heart hammering so loud she could hear it echo off the walls. The air smelled of cigarettes and rain, and a single lamp flickered on the coffee table, casting long shadows across the cluttered floor. "Ryan," she called out softly, but there was no answer. Her eyes darted around, an overturned chair, a shattered glass on the rug, and a dark stain near the couch that made her blood run cold. She took a step closer, her breath catching as she realized it wasn't spilled wine, it was blood. Panic surged through her as she turned toward the hallway, where the bedroom door was half open, light spilling through a thin crack. She pushed it slowly, her trembling hand gripping the knob. Inside, Ryan sat on the edge of the bed, his face pale, eyes red, a half-empty bottle of whiskey hanging from his hand. "You shouldn't have come," he muttered, without looking up. Caroline's voice shook. "Where's Emily? What did you do?" Ryan laughed bitterly, his words slurred but sharp. "She came here earlier, said she hated me, slapped me right across the face. Guess it runs in the family." He looked up then, eyes wild, unfocused. "You both ruined me, you know that. You made me believe I mattered." Caroline stepped back, fear crawling up her spine. "Ryan, please, we can fix this. Just tell me where she is." But Ryan's expression darkened, and he stood slowly, staggering slightly. "There's no fixing this, Caroline. You chose your lies over me. She chose hate. I've got nothing left to lose." He grabbed her wrist, his grip tight, painful. She tried to pull away, pleading for him to let go, but he shoved her against the wall. "You think you can just erase me?" he shouted, his voice echoing through the room. In that moment, Caroline realized she wasn't staring at the same man she once thought she loved. She was staring at something broken, dangerous, and unpredictable. She reached for anything within arm's reach. Her hand found a glass vase on the table. As Ryan moved closer, yelling, she swung. The vase shattered against his head, and he fell to the floor, motionless. Caroline froze, gasping, staring at the blood pooling around him. Her body shook uncontrollably. "Oh my God," she whispered, dropping to her knees. She tried to check his pulse, her hands slick with blood. He was breathing faintly, but alive. She stood, shaking, realizing what she had done. The room seemed to spin, the lamp flickering wildly. In the reflection of the broken mirror, she saw herself drenched, terrified, and unrecognizable. She grabbed her phone with trembling hands, ready to call for help. when the sound of a car screeching outside caught her attention. She turned toward the window, and her heart stopped. It was Emily. She was standing in the rain, staring up at the apartment window with a look of horror that would haunt Caroline forever. For a long, shattering moment, no one moved. The only sound was the rain hammering the roof and the distant rumble of thunder. Caroline stood frozen in the middle of the room, her hands slick with blood, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. Down on the street, Emily didn't move. Either she was staring up through the window, eyes wide with disbelief, her lips parting in a silent scream. When their gazes met through the glass, time seemed to stop. The world outside faded, leaving only the unbearable truth between them. Caroline stumbled backward, panic flooding her mind. She rushed to the window, shouting Emily's name, but her voice was drowned by the storm. Moments later, she saw her daughter running toward the building. Caroline turned back toward Ryan. He was still alive, barely conscious, groaning in pain. "I didn't mean to," she whispered, as if saying it aloud would make it true. Her trembling fingers hovered over her phone again, but before she could dial, the front door burst open. Emily stood there, soaked, trembling, eyes blazing with anger and horror. "What did you do to him?" she screamed, rushing to Ryan's side. Caroline tried to explain, her words tumbling out in broken sobs, how he attacked her, how she only wanted him to stop, but Emily wouldn't listen. "You liar," she cried, clutching Ryan's hand. "You've taken everything from me." The sound of her daughter's voice, so full of hate, was worse than any punishment Caroline could imagine. She fell to her knees, pleading, but Emily pushed her away, shouting for help. The neighbors, alarmed by the noise and commotion, began to gather outside. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder by the second. Caroline backed against the wall, her mind spinning, unable to process what she had done. When the police arrived, they found her sitting in shock, whispering Ryan's name like a prayer. He was rushed to the hospital, unconscious, while Caroline was handcuffed and led outside. The rain had stopped by then, but the air was still heavy, thick with judgment. Emily stood under the streetlight, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, her face pale and streaked with tears. She didn't say a word as her mother was placed in the back of the police car. Their eyes met one last time, Caroline's filled with regret, Emily's with devastation, and that single look, everything that had once been love, turned to ashes. The officers drove away, the flashing red and blue lights reflecting off the wet pavement, painting the night in colors of guilt and ruin. Back at the apartment, the wind blew through the open window, scattering broken glass across the floor. A single photo lay face down near the Coucha family picture, taken years ago, back when smiles were still real and love was still pure. Now it was nothing more than a memory drenched in blood. The courtroom smelled of polished wood and stale air, the kind of place where truth and lies wore the same face until someone decided which one to believe. Caroline sat quietly at the defense table, her wrists free, but her soul shackled by guilt. The trial had become the town's obsession, every whisper, every headline, every photo painting her as the monster who seduced her daughter's boyfriend and then tried to kill him. The prosecution called it crime of passion, a polite way of saying madness dressed as love. Ryan survived, but the damage he'd done lived far beyond the scars on his head. He sat in the witness stand now, pale and distant, playing the role of the victim. His voice trembled at all the right moments, describing Caroline as unstable, obsessed, manipulative, a woman who couldn't handle rejection. Each word hit her like a hammer. She wanted to scream the truth, that he'd blackmailed her, that he'd destroyed her family long before the night of the fight. But when she glanced at Emily sitting in the front row, eyes empty and cold, she couldn't. Her daughter still believed Ryan, still thought her mother was the monster in this story. Caroline had already taken too much from her. She couldn't take away her version of peace, no matter how false it was. So she stayed silent, absorbing every accusation like punishment she knew she deserved. Her lawyer whispered strategy, to fight, to expose Ryan's lies. But Caroline barely heard him. Her mind drifted back to the beginning, to the rain, to the moment that first text had changed everything. She'd traded a quiet life for chaos, love for obsession, and truth for ruin. When it was her turn to speak, the courtroom fell silent. "I made mistakes," she said softly, her voice trembling, "but I didn't try to kill him. I just wanted it to stop." Her words echoed, thin and fragile. The prosecutor pressed harder, showing the photos, the text messages, the shattered vase, the blood. Every image turned her shame into spectacle. By the time it ended, the verdict didn't matter anymore. Caroline already knew she'd lost everything that mattered. When the judge announced a 3-year sentence for aggravated assault, the room buzzed with murmurs. Some said too little, others too much. Caroline just bowed her head, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. As the bailiff led her away, she glanced one last time at Emily. Her daughter didn't move, didn't cry, just stared at the floor. Ryan leaned toward her, whispering something that made her nod faintly. That was the final knife. Caroline closed her eyes, whispering a prayer that someday Emily would see the truth, that monsters aren't always born evil. Sometimes they're made by love, twisted too far. As the heavy doors closed behind her, the rain began again outside, washing the courthouse steps as if the sky itself wanted to rinse away what no human heart could. 3 years later, the world outside the prison walls still moved on, but inside, time stood still for Carolyn Miller, the once-proud woman who'd hosted garden parties and charity events. Now spent her days folding laundry and writing letters that were never answered. Every night before lights out, she sat on her bunk and wrote to Emily long, aching letters filled with apologies and memories. Stories of when they used to bake together, when laughter still lived in their home. She never sent them. She just folded them neatly and hid them under her pillow, as if saving words could somehow save love. Her release came quietly one gray morning in early spring. No reporters, no family, just a correctional officer handing her a bag with her old clothes and a worn photograph of Emily tucked inside. When the gates opened, the wind hit her face like the first breath after drowning. She didn't know where to go, so she went home, or what was left of it. The house stood silent, for sale sign crooked on the lawn, the paint peeling, the garden overgrown. She stood on the porch where it all began, where she first met Ryan, where she first lost herself. Tears welled as she stepped inside, dust rising like ghosts of the life she'd destroyed. Then she heard footsteps. Emily stood in the doorway, older now, calmer, her expression unreadable. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence between them was heavy, fragile, sacred. "I wasn't sure you'd come," Emily said quietly. Caroline's voice cracked. I wasn't sure I should. Emily took a deep breath, her hands trembling. Ryan's gone. He moved away after the trial. I haven't heard from him since. Caroline nodded, unsure whether to feel relief or sorrow. Emily looked at her mother, really looked for the first time in years. I hated you, she said, voice trembling. Every day, I hated you. But I kept thinking about that night, about how scared you looked, and I don't know anymore. I just know I'm tired of hating you. Caroline's tears came freely now. I don't expect forgiveness, she whispered. I just wanted to see you again. Emily hesitated, then stepped forward, wrapping her arms around her mother. It wasn't a perfect embrace. It was awkward, hesitant, but real. For the first time, Caroline felt warmth that wasn't guilt, the warmth of something still alive, fragile, but possible. They stood there for a long time, two broken souls in a broken home, holding on to the faintest spark of redemption. Outside, the rain began to fall again, soft and steady, washing the dust from the windows. As they sat together on the porch, Caroline handed Emily one of her unsent letters. Emily opened it and read silently. When she finished, she didn't speak. She just rested her head on her mother's shoulder. In the fading light, Caroline finally smiled, not because everything was fixed, but because, after all the pain, there was still something left worth living for. Somewhere far away, thunder rolled again, gentle this time, as if the storm that had haunted their lives had finally learned how to let go.